Welcome to The Human Code, the podcast where technology meets humanity, and the future is shaped by the leaders and innovators of today. I'm your host, Don Finley, inviting you on a journey through the fascinating world of tech, leadership, and personal growth. Here, we delve into the stories of visionary minds who are not only driving technological advancement, but also embodying the personal journeys and insights that inspire us all. Each episode, we explore the intersections where human ingenuity meets the cutting edge of technology, unpacking the experiences, challenges, and triumphs that define our era. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, an inspiring entrepreneur, or simply curious about the human narratives behind the digital revolution, you're in the right place. Welcome to The Human Code. I have Adam Posner here. He's the founder and president of NHP Talent. NHP is a boutique, New York-based talent consultancy specializing in talent access for senior-level roles within digital marketing, media, e-commerce, product and content creation at startups, creative agencies, and brands. Adam also is the inspiration that got me started with this podcast after I was a guest on the Poscast, showcasing experts to help you harness your inner tenacity to drive in your life and career forward. He has produced and aired over 250 episodes to date.
320.
320? All right, man, you got to give me updated information if you want this to be right, bud. But look, besides having top guests like Gary Vaynerchuk, Kevin Smith, Chris Jericho, and Grant Cardone, and Tucker Max, as well as Don Finley, just to name a few. Dude, you have been quite a busy man over the past couple of years, and I got to say, I love it. I'm really excited to be talking with you today about that intersection between technology and humanity. But before we dive into the foundation that we have today, what's your story, man?
Oh, man.
What got you to be the person that you are today?
What is my story? It's interesting, too, because I've been thinking about this a bit, and I have this thought, and I don't own this thought, but a lot of people have talked about it. There's chapters of your life. There's seasons of your life. And once you start to put that into perspective, you start to think more about the journey and how you got to where you are today and how you probably most likely wouldn't have gotten to where you are today without those highs, the lows, the pivots, and everything in between, the successes, the failures, the wins, the losses. So my story, real quick for your audience who has not had the pleasure to hear my story, born and raised New Yorker, super proud of that. I know this guy's down in Philly over there. It's this long-running rivalry. I despise the Eagles. I despise the Phillies. And I certainly despise, who did I forget there? The Flyers. Yes, I despise the Flyers as well there too. But you are a Giant fan.
I am a Giants fan. I was born in North Jersey, and I kept my New York teams. But even though I live in Philly, we got one thing we can admit.
You got Saquon Barkley.
We both hate Dallas.
Yes, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. But you guys,
Exactly.
But the Eagles. But you're not an Eagles fan. But the Eagles got Saquon Barkley. So anyway, I digress here. First 15 years of my career working in marketing, media, and advertising here in New York. I worked at various ad agencies, different sizes. Spent time on the corporate side at SiriusXM for 5 years when Howard Stern came over, which is a big inspiration for the podcast, which I'll get to in a minute. American Express, and then lastly, before I pivoted into recruiting, working for Gary Vaynerchuk over at VaynerMedia. As the story goes, the grass was not greener on the other side. I was not the professional man that I am now. I was not my best self, and I ended up losing my job over there. That was a moment of my career self-awareness epiphany. And on my way out of Vayner, Gary said to me, stop focusing on your weaknesses, double down on your strengths. And then I lost my shit. I didn't know what to do, and I decided to get recruiting because it really capitalized on my strengths, which is what we're doing now, my knowledge of the network, my knowledge of my relationships that go deep. And I dove in head first. But before I actually dove in head first, I did do a bit of due diligence. I met with every recruiter that I've ever engaged with. And I spent about 3 or 4 weeks doing that. And they're so generous with their time, really telling me the ups and downs. But until you're in the role, until you're recruiting, and that was 9 years ago. Monday will actually be my 9-year Vayner V-Day, the day I got let go from Vayner. So I'm approaching 9 years, which is a long time in, as we said before, these chapters of your life to move into recruiting. So I spent the first 3 years working at recruiting search firms, learning the art and science of recruiting, because there is a deep art and science. And I'm glad I learned it that way, because that gave me the foundation. And that was hard for me, Don. I had to start even the thought of it now sickens me. The thought in my head when I'm like, oh my God, I just spent 15, 16 years building myself up to director level in an industry. And now I'm starting tomorrow It was July 9th as a newbie, a rookie. Like if you're using sports
Yeah.
analogies, here's like shit going into the major leagues and now you're like day one there. And it was scary. I was scared. I had to learn a new career. Like I had to learn a new profession. When
You're basically like Jordan going from basketball to
Yeah, but
baseball, right?
I didn't really think of it like that at the time, but if you want to go with that, we'll stick with it. Spent 3 years at a search firm, almost 2.5 years. And then another epiphany where I was like, why am I giving half my commissions to the house here? And literally overnight, I went out on my own and I launched NHP Talent Group, which are my daughter's initials here. She looks over my shoulder all the time. I also have a 6-year-old son, and once he figures out what these initials mean, he's going to be pissed off. I promise you that. We are a boutique staffing firm here in New York, focusing on all things marketing, media, ad tech, martech, tech, all those kind of fun things. A couple different recruitment models that we work with. I have a great team around me, terrific clients. Really approach recruiting from a empathetic, as best we can, and pragmatic way, and just being real with my clients and doing our best work for them. The podcast, that was born 5 years ago. 5 years. We just launched 323 episodes, 1.7 million downloads. And it's been an incredible journey. And that was just an itch I needed to scratch, Don. Growing up as a Howard Stern fan, working at Sirius for Howard Stern. He is the consummate, ultimate interviewer because he turns every interview into a conversation. And that's the way I like to do my show. And the show built up. I reached into my network. I went deep and I kept going, and I caught the podcasting bug, and I stuck with it when things were slow for the first year, not getting over more than 70, 80, 90, 100, 150 downloads an episode. And then after year one, it just took off. And as I said, the rest is history. And I built a brand and a recruitment business that is interwoven with the podcast. The podcast
That
and
is
NHP Talent
absolutely-
Group are symbiotic. They live and breathe off of each other. They're on the yin and yang of my world. I've really focused from a business perspective on consolidating my effort and energy towards driving that forward.
I'm definitely wrapping this up, but Gary's advice to you is first focusing on your strengths is really where you're leaning into. And it's playing out in the podcast, it's playing out in the recruiting world. And I think this was a shared experience. I love having these conversations with people, getting to know them, getting to understand what makes them tick, where they see the world going. And the podcast was just a nice extension of being able to have those conversations and share it with more people.
Yeah. It's taken us to every one of those, like the conversation that we had when you're on my show, that's us just talking and getting to know each other and connecting, and then just having it be public. And
Yeah.
and I never really thought of it that way until you just said that, but it's right. That's what I want to do. And most folks, we had a pre-chat before the podcast, I think. Yeah. Maybe. No,
Maybe 5 minutes.
Right?
Yeah, we had it.
But if you think about it that way, and listen, the podcast is my Trojan horse for business development and relationships, right? Because if you think about it, traditional business development, it's either events, which I do all the time, which is great, but that's one-to-one, or you're cold calling, cold emailing, spamming the shit out of people, and that doesn't work. I'd rather reach out to a decision maker, a thought leader at a company that I want to do business with, or someone I want to build a relationship with for future development, and say, hey, I have a top global career podcast. I've been following you for a while. I love your background. Come on the show. And then after you build that rapport, after you establish rapport, thought leadership, authority, I know what the hell I'm talking about. This guy seems interesting. That lady seems interesting. Then after the fact, offline, then you connect and you see where there's those business opportunities to help each other out. Mutual value proposition.
Absolutely, my friend. Now, here's what I would love to get into with you. The recruiting world and technology. Like we're in a space today that AI is hot. And we've had a bunch of, let's just say the last year and a half, where we've seen a lot of personal productivity come about at it. But also businesses are looking at what their AI strategy is and how they're going to adapt this technology that could have profound impacts, both in the current state and also the future. Where do you see this possible explosion going?
It's a great question. I think just to ladder it up to the 30,000 foot view, I think most of us, from a business perspective and a personal use of AI, we need to look at AI as a tool and not a crutch. There's a big difference there, especially where AI is now. You might think it's fantastic, but when if you're using just a basic version of ChatGPT, we're up to 4.5 or whatever it is right now, like there's nuances there that just aren't, like, there's subtleties. You can't always take something word for word. You have to finesse it. You have to fine tune it. Garbage in, garbage out. That's the way the prompts work on any ALML kind of program there, right? It's a little different than Google that's scouring the internet. This is taking what's already inputted into the platform. It's a different kind of world here without getting too technical on people. So generally speaking, when you're using AI, like the way I love to use it from a personal perspective, I use it in my live while I'm writing. I use a product called Grammarly, which has AI into it, which is predictive. And it's also the way it reviews the content for me. The biggest part for me is the sentiment analysis. So depending on who I'm writing to, whether it be personal, professional, what that is, I want to be more personal. I want to be more confident. I want to be more authoritative. Depending on what the tone's going to be, it helps me get there. So using it as a tool and not a crutch. I'm not going to ChatGPT and please write an email to my client saying, why the heck haven't you responded to me in 2 days? You know what I mean? No.
Yeah.
And now when you think about it with recruiting, that's a whole other different ballgame. And I was talking to you offline. I just got back from a big conference, Transform, out in Vegas with the best of industry leaders, thought leaders, companies that are doing this day in and day out, the largest HR tech stack platforms out there. And this is what I asked them. I go, how are you using it? And it's interesting because they're using it a few different ways. We're looking to amplify, enhance the recruitment experience internally and externally. Internally for the teams using it and externally for the candidates. How do you make it a better experience? At the same time, it's a fine balance with the humanity that you talk about, right? Because recruiting is humanity. You are dealing with a human being. And as a recruiter, you're dealing with their X factors. AI cannot yet handle in recruiting the human X factors, emotions, motivations, disappointment, understanding that someone might have another offer. So the best part I've seen it is where could you use AI and other automation to allow a recruiter, internal or external, more time with the candidate to understand their why and their motivation and hear their story. For example, there's great tools out there that will have a chatbot function and ask questions to make sure you meet the minimum requirements. Let's talk about if it's a technical role. Do you have this software program? How many years? This software program. Let's make sure that you at least have the core foundation for a role. So that way, if I'm on a screening call with you, that's half an hour, I'm not spending 17 minutes talking to you about stuff that could have been answered yes or no. I could spend that time getting to know Don, what he's looking for, what his motivation is, talk about the culture and the company and the role a bit more. So how could you do something more efficient, more effective to allow more time for that human part of recruiting? So I love companies that are using it for that. On the back end, from a recruitment perspective, it's how are you, companies are doing this. They are skill ranking candidates based on their resume and experience. And you have to be careful with this because it's going to cause the opposite effect, as you can imagine. I see your wheel spinning of people now stacking their resume with shit and keywords that they think they want to hear. So it's a double edged sword.
Isn't that already happening
today?
Of course. And then,
But now you're just layering on the tech on top of that to rank candidates. Yeah. And it's tough, right? Because obviously your resume is, that's your ad. That's your billboard. You're going to make it shine as bright as possible. The rubber hits the road when people interview and they get smoked out and get those tough questions. So it's a interesting world.
Do you think we're in a time of transition as far as stack ranking candidates, or is this a fad that will pass?
No, I think that we're continuing to find efficiencies and ways to evaluate. Now, it's interesting. So if you're evaluating someone like, what is that source of truth? That's always a question in recruiting. Like, even when we talk about like people taking the resume to the blockchain and using verification tools to say, Adam worked at this company, that company, and all it's saying is a number of years. And we're getting there. We're in the very early stages, and that's going to be fantastic. All we're looking for is straight up employment verification from a timeline perspective. Now you talk about skills. It's subjective. It's me telling you how good I did it. And the problem with the recruiting is it's not always the best candidate that gets a job. It's usually the person who interviews the best gets a job. And I've been that person. I'm a great interviewer.
We can take out, man.
But then there's times when I got into a job and I fucking sucked at it, at the job, when the rubber hits the road.
So I think that's a good lesson to bring out again is it's not the best candidate that gets the job. It's the best interviewer gets the job.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all been in those companies where like somebody interviews fantastic and then it's a complete dud. We've also probably been in that situation where like we've interviewed well and then it's been a dud as well. But it's a strong skill that is going to get you the job. And that is an important piece of the equation.
Yeah, but that's why I'm also not opposed to certain skill-based assessments for the role, whether it be a writing assignment or a tech assignment.
Yeah.
And then when people push back on that, I'm like, listen, if you want this job, 1 or 2 hours of your time is a worthy investment. Now, egregious, long, 6, 7-hour multiple day that's not compensated, I'm against that. Or trying
Yeah.
to get to steal IP from somebody. Yeah, here's our current marketing plan. Tell us everything that's wrong with it. But you want me to do the job for free right now? Get the hell out of here.
I find those to be a little bit egregious as well. Along those lines, though, do you see it as being like, so my partner, she was applying for jobs and she was applying for probably at least 15, 20 of them a day,
Mhm.
right? It became more of a shotgun approach than actually a very targeted. And then this is the way that basically people are job hunting today as well. Is this what you're seeing, or was this like a unique
No,
experience?
no, it's really tough out there for job seekers. It's a supply and demand issue at this point. Recruiting in the job market is cyclical and it goes through it. Every
Yeah.
few years, it's like a 3 or 4 year cycle. Supply, demand, overhire. And we're in this mode right now, Don. I call it the great recalibration. And I want everyone to think
Okay.
about it this way. Beginning of the pandemic, which was we were in a somewhat of a good place economically right before the pandemic, right? It was okay. Things were doing okay, right? It wasn't amazing. They're okay. It was a stable job market. There was standard hiring going on. So what happens during the pandemic, right? Everything stops. Companies freak out. Bunch of people get let go because they're like, oh, we can't do this. The fear of the world's coming to an end. And we saw a bunch of mass layoffs. Then what happens, the government steps in and all of a sudden they start handing out cheap money and cheap loans. Literally cheap ass. I took one. It was basically with that interest rate for 30 years. I was like, yeah, give it to me. You mean I only have to pay off a little bit every month for the next, what's like, you give me a chunk of money. But think about me as a small business owner getting a decent amount. These companies were getting millions, tens, 20s, hundreds of millions from the government. So what did they do? They binge hired. And it was easy to binge hire because everybody was remote. Now, if your corporate office is in New York, it didn't even matter. You could just hire people all across the country and fill them up. And it looked good for the investors. It looked good for the board. It looked good for the stock prices. Everything was going great. Then what happens? Then the bills are due. And then inflation goes up. And guess what happens? The economy starts to be questionable. There's political turmoil in the world. Election year is coming up. And the mass layoffs happens because it was binge hiring. And that's where the recalibration came in. And during that time also, people were getting crazy high salaries. And then what happens when they get let go, they're still expecting to get that number back and they're not even going to get close to that. So now as a recruiter, we're having terrible, difficult conversations with people like, listen, I know you were making 200K there. You were hired 2.5 years ago at peak pandemic. Sorry, that number right now is a lot closer to what you were making before you took that job. It just is what it is. Companies do not have those deep pockets. And now we're in this mode of the great recalibration where things are getting back to a place where they were beforehand. Right? The
Interesting.
pandemic, a complete anomaly, if you're looking at it from on a financial, economic kind of cycle and scale. It wasn't a planned thing. It wasn't like something you could predict if you're looking charts. And that's not my world. I'm not a numbers economic guy.
Oh,
And I'm
no, yeah, it was completely out of left,
So you
right?
can't. So now we're
Yeah.
finally recalibrating to a place where probably a lot more realistic from a job perspective. Throw on top of that in the United States, it's an election year, right? So what's
Yeah.
happening there is obviously the current president's driving the job numbers up and inflating them to make them look good. No sitting president who's up for an election wants that on their plate. And then you get to the candidates where people are out of work, they're looking for jobs, and they're literally just throwing Hail Marys all day long. So what's happening there, Don, is that's flooding the candidate pipeline. So you have companies with less recruiters to review the resumes, more resumes coming in, not enough time to look at them. So great people are going to slip through the cracks. They're overwhelmed. They're going to try to hire the best-ish person as quickly as possible and move on,
Yes.
fill the role and move on instead of having the time to really recruit a role. And it's a really tough place. So when you think about a candidate, it's desperation versus being targeted and strategic. So when I'm coaching candidates and I'm having these conversations with them, it sounds counterintuitive to them. I'm like, I would rather you focus on a few companies and let's figure out the strategy, the tactics, let's network, let's reverse backdoor into this company and target the role that you really want versus spending your time all day spraying and praying. It's a hard conversation and you have to prove it out to them.
But I think there's a lot of value in that. And so let's bring this back into the
Sorry,
conversation
that was a lot.
about
I know. I
AI.
didn't even plan to
Well,
go down that route, but it needed the background on it.
No, and I think that's a beautiful way to go. Because what you're talking about is we now have a system that is flooded with candidates. We have the job opportunities, but we don't have the people to process the candidates as well. And so your advice for candidates is really pare down where you want to be and set a strategy for how you're going to get there. The question I want to add to that, though, is how do you see AI playing into this from a
Oh yeah.
candidate's perspective to be able to manage that process and actually help
No.
them get to their
So there's
place?
some great tools out there. But you
Cool.
have to be careful. And it goes back to what I said before, is a tool, not a crutch. So
Yes.
there's a great tool out there called Teal. Teal helps with using AI technology for resume writing. The problem is you cannot rely on that tool to just say, "Hey, I am a front end developer," and letting it automatically load in whatever standard. Because I'm going to look at that as a recruiter and I'm gonna be like, I could tell. I have a trained eye where I could look at a resume and be like, this isn't nuanced for what you actually did. Now, the basic rule with resume is show, don't tell. I want to see what you did and how you did it. I drove sales by 32% year over year by implementing XYZ 1, 2, 3 programs.
Yeah.
If you have a bland, watered down statement in there that you just decided to autofill from an AI resume tool, that's not going to get you through the door. If you're using AI to take a job description and then have it merge with your resume and pull that in, that's doing you a disservice because you may not have those skills and it's false advertising. Buyer beware. Be careful with that. So I urge candidates, try them because it helps you be organized. It brings in new opportunities and maybe to even think about. It helps you customize a little bit for certain roles without taking up too much work. The best part is it keeps you organized and tracking where you applied. But
Okay.
please be careful on over relying on the technology as gospel. It'll get you in trouble and it won't get you the job. It's dangerous because we're in the first at bat of the first inning with this stuff.
And I think that's what's creating the part of the turmoil that we're seeing in the tech space could partially be equated to what's going on with AI. We saw a couple weeks ago, Tyler Perry put on pause an $800 million investment for a new studio outside of Atlanta because of what OpenAI demoed, not even released.
demo.
They basically showed text to video that the quality was so good that he basically said, I might not need this anymore.
Generative AI is so good and we're so early still.
Yeah. Remember, probably a year and a half ago, we were talking about how AI couldn't generate hands.
It's still a little here.
Exactly. Still just a little bit. But at the same time, it's definitely improving. How do you see this changing the world? Let's go 5 years down the line, right? I think you outlined a little bit about this earlier, saying we need to be focusing on the relationships and using AI more for the things that are repeatable, machinable. Where else do you seeing this having an
Everyone fears that AI is going to take your job. That's not the case. The
Yeah.
people that know how to use AI the right way are going to take your job. Yes, certain roles will be replaced, but how are you going to innovate yourself? It's like anything else, right? It's like before the modern engine was developed, right? The horseshoe guy. Shit, I got to pivot now. I got to become a car repairman. So you have to be on top of that and not be so stubborn, and you have to embrace the technology because it's not going anywhere. It's coming faster than you think. This technology is moving so fast. And to your point earlier, a year ago, we couldn't get past 6 fingers on a hand. And now we got Tyler Perry basically saying, this technology is pretty damn good. I'm going to pause $1 billion studio here to see where I could use AI for a more effective way. So it's about embracing it. It's about figuring it out. How do you infuse more humanity, more creativity into it? How do you use the tool? Think about simple things. Think about the computer, the working modern personal computer. People were typing on typewriters, pounding away on calculators, no Excel spreadsheets, no documents, no internet. But we get there. It's innovation. And if you don't embrace it, you're going to fall behind. And that's why, side note with my kids, I don't mind them on the iPad every once in a while for a certain amount. I want them to know how to use technology. I want them to know social media tools, how to use it. I don't want them in the dark. I talk to my 12-year-old daughter about AI. She uses it.
So there's some definite skill set changes that happen. Like when I go from being a developer to being a manager, blah, 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 right? Down the line, as far as where you end up with your career. As we see the people who are learning to use AI, what are the skill sets that stand out for you that are necessary to be developed in this transition?
It's interesting too. I think it comes down to a core skill set that I admire in personal and professional relationships is curiosity. I love when someone's curious and they're asking genuine questions because they want to find out. They're not just being a jerk, but they want to know more, right? Because that innate ability to search for why and search for answers. So the people that have that skill and characteristic and now taking it to AI and going down those rabbit holes, prompt engineering is going to be a massive role coming down the pipe. And prompt engineering is really going to tie into the creative side that you were talking about before. How do you generate a scene for a movie using AI? How do you put in the right things? So like you're still being creative. So think about these writers that are now having to change their mindset to saying, how do I take these words and what is it going to look like on screen? And how do I use the technology to get it there? So there's going to have to be middle men and women or middle non-binary, whatever people, middle people, right? To get you there. And it's going to be fascinating. Like these are all new jobs that are being created. It's evolution.
There's a skill set that I'm hearing you talk about, and it's basically understanding how to work with the machine.
It's Terminator.
But we're getting away from the technical aspect of it. And it feels more along the lines of a managerial role of you've got this asset and you're trying to inspire it to create the best thing possible for you. And so you need to step in and be that person that opens that door.
Yeah, that's the way I'm seeing it right now. And also, how do you be the champion in your organization to almost future-proof yourself or future yourself as a professional? Always be upskilling, right? Don't fall in the dark, right? Every industry is going to be affected by AI. Every single industry.
Now, we've talked about it from the candidate side. Where are you hearing it from the client side as well?
Yeah.
What are companies?
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said before too. I think it comes down to asking the question, depending on the role, obviously, right? It's understanding what people's familiarity with it is. And we've had a couple of these jobs come through and not a ton of volume, but there's obviously the technical pieces, right? What are you using? What programs using, especially for ALML? I think that's really a key piece. But then it comes down to use case. Talk to us about how you've used it within the organization. What were the problems? I love talking about the problems because if someone could openly talk about, hey, test, learn, optimize, fail, and talk about it in a very candid way. It's not like I failed. We're still figuring this shit out. And here's what we learned from that. And here's how we took that learning and built on that and optimized. That's what clients want to hear, especially at senior levels. FIO, we call it FIO, right? It's figure it out. I want to hear how you figured it out.
Okay.
We want people who figure stuff out, their problems. It sounds so cliche, Don, right? But in our industry, we want problem solvers. We don't want problem makers. We want problem solvers. So
I think that's an important thing to bring up, right? Like every company that I've seen that is successful in their AI implementation today has taken a look at it from an experimentation approach. They say, hey, this is the hypothesis we have. We're going to try this out. We're going to learn from it. We're adopting a new tech. We know that we're going to have probably 3 revisions before we really get it right. So let's plan on at least having that many, but checking in after each one to ensure that we're going in the right direction, that we can implement the things that we've learned, that we can share those areas where we failed.
Yeah, it's transparency. It's radical candor, removing ego emotion as best you can. We're never going to fully remove it in this world, right? We're ego-driven. Humans are ego-driven animals. I don't know what do animals have egos? Or is ego a human's?
Oh man, we could go.
I'm just curious. I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to ask ChatGPT.
So here's my take on it. I would imagine yes. My dog definitely has a sense of self. Right. And that's where I think you would see the ego showing up from an external space.
Fascinating.
I don't know if he's thinking about himself in that regard, but like
how does your dog envision himself in the world? We're going down a crazy rabbit hole here.
My God.
All right, moving back. Let's get back to center.
I would absolutely love to see that. Yeah.
But is AI going to get to a point too when we have implants in animals? I'm sure they're doing it already in some dark labs in Albuquerque, New Mexico, under the ground, where they're putting chips into animals to understand how they're thinking and then synthesizing that. Definitely.
Adam, we're already putting chips in humans.
Yeah.
But along those lines, there's also headsets that you can wear that have a bunch of sensors on it. And they've used AI to read your brain. Well, to read your brain waves is what the headset does. And then they've used AI to reconstruct what you're thinking about.
That is crazy talk right there. Imagine it's almost like a mental Mad Lib.
Yeah. And then think about it. Neuralink is putting the chip directly into the person. But if like literally I could just like strap on a headset for when I'm working, and now it's the thoughts that are communicating to the computer, That's incredibly powerful.
And imagine you're running that at night too, and you could optimize your thinking
Oh my
because
God, you could run dreams through
you
it.
run through it. Then you're also like, some of my best thoughts are in the middle of the night. And it's always cliche. I always meant to leave like a pad and pen by my end table, but I never do it. And I never even use, you're not going to roll over and go in your notes section. The phone's all bright in your face. But what if you could be like, you have a thought in your head and you're like, Siri, write this. You can do that now. You just yell it to your
Yeah.
Siri. So they have that already. But what if you don't have to say it? You just think it in your head.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
Like my phone, this Siri just loaded up on my phone. Because
I think the other side that I would take that too is having a dream journal, right? A lot of times I wake up and I don't remember we still have them.
every night.
And so if you had this headset on and it could tell you that you had this dream and then you could walk through it, there's a lot of value that could be placed into systems like that and exploration. Now, going back to really yourself and your own experience, where is it that you would love to see AI help you both in your personal life and in professional?
That's a good question. I think from a recruiting perspective, it's how could I scale? And I found it very practically. So here's a practical scenario with AI. I've had a fantastic producer, Chris, who's been with me on my show for the last 3 years. He has basically handled all of the research and all of the post-production. He's got me 70% of the way with the show, and then I do my own research and I get it in the way that I want it, but he's unearthing things about the guest. He's going deep into it. Chris moved on to another role. We're still buddies and we still do work together, but he couldn't be my day-to-day producer. And because last year was such a rough year financially for me, I couldn't just go out and hire another producer. And I had the bandwidth to do it myself. And I did it before him, and I'm going to do it after him. I said, you know what? Let's embrace the tools here. So twofold. One, when it comes down to research, being able to synthesize, I could take video, audio, blogs from a guest, feed it into the AI tool that I would use, and it would give me questions. It would give me snippets. It would give me things that I need. It would give me thoughts. But how do you prompt it? So that was a big learning curve for me. I spent a lot of time doing that. And then in post-production, the tool that I use to record on Riverside, I'm not doing a plug for them on your show, but just telling you, they have an incredible suite of AI technology. So what that's doing for me at the end of the show, aside from the fact that I could do audio, video recording, editing within, based on transcripts. So instead of having to old school chop up videos and move them around, something that I would outsource, I could literally highlight something and say delete, takes it out of the video by words. Not only that, it's now giving me show summaries, title recommendations, blog posts, Twitter things, and AI virality scored social clips based on what the machine thinks will perform best on social media, and then it cuts them and it clips them for me. So now I've made myself more efficient, more effective, and more cost effective, where I don't need to outsource any of that.
That's fantastic. And I think like I said earlier, you were an inspiration for us to do this because of those efforts that you took, and you showed us that, hey, we can go to this tool to get the social. We can go to this tool. We can do the transcript editing. Here's how you get it distributed. Like, it was so...
Look at Opus Pro. You feed it in there and you get 20 clips and you edit it a little bit and you're done, and it spits it out with captions. Years ago when I launched the show, Don, I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off there. 5 years ago when I launched the show, I had to have a video guy, a separate audio guy. I was outsourcing the graphics. The graphics I still outsource but you can do that with AI now. You can, in theory, if you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. What's even hilarious is I was doing a podcast probably 6 months ago with a friend, and not knowing what I was doing, we were doing a video podcast. We had multiple cameras. She would come over to the house. We'd set everything up, and we would record. Half an hour podcast would take me at least 4 or 5 hours to edit. And I had a little bit of AI that was doing it, but still had to go through, add cut points into the actual film, switch over to what we're doing today. And we're doing the transcript editing.
Yeah.
Right. Makes it super easy. Even on parts of it where we can't get the edit right, especially if it's my voice, I can use AI to dub it over. And that's working out well for anything that's not video
so
related.
Easy. You cut out the ums, the ahs, the pauses, automatic. It just does it.
Exactly. It just eliminates it. So is there anything, are you actually doing the research up front with AI? Oh, yeah. That's fantastic.
But I have to still find the data points. Right.
Okay.
But
so you collect the data points and then.
So like what I'll do is, for example, I'll get a couple of episodes of a past guest show. I'll use AI to pull the transcript, feed it back in, and then do different types of prompts. What questions, for example, I'm going to hypothetical. What questions would you ask this guest that have not been asked and answered within this show? So you could find the fresh questions, go deeper. How would you spin this differently? There's different prompts you could use.
Yep.
And it's fun too, just effing around and finding out. Oh, that's cool. But some of it's raw. Some of that makes zero sense. That's stupid, ChatGPT. You're stupid. That makes no sense. And some of you're like, wow, that I wouldn't have even thought of that on my own. And the more you feed it, the more it learns, the more the beast. And it can ingest audio, video, just by links. You don't even have to do anything most of the time. Take this link, generate the transcript, and then do this. We're there. We're there. We're there.
We are.
We're there. We're here. We're doing it. I'm doing it. It's happening.
You're doing it. We literally built a similar tool as well. You filled out the show pre-form, and then that in the future will kick off another AI that actually generates show notes for me. Or not show notes, but basically questions and everything else. Right now we're going through that process manually to make sure that we get the right prompts to create the content we want.
How about this one I'm going to try to do? I've been doing like you. I do a live show read. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I got Don Finley on, the founder, blah, blah, blah. One of my buddies said this to me literally a week ago. He's, dude, that shit's boring. You are losing so many people in the beginning that just don't want to hear that. He's like, why don't you try this? Start the show just like this. Hey, Don, what's up? And just get into it. Take the show, run it through ChatGPT afterwards, find the hookiest, baitiest, most interesting parts from that in a teaser format and be like, hey, we're going to talk about AI with Don Finley, and he's going to drop some serious alpha on what's coming next after the show. So record your intro after the show. Because when I'm doing my intro, I'm not even talking about, I have no idea what we're going to talk about. What if we make a left turn like we just did before with dog AI and the dogs have egos? We didn't even talk about that in your intro. But what if now your new intro, based on taking that transcript, is like, did you ever think that dogs have egos? Did you even think that we would even talk about this with a conversation with Adam? Oh, yeah. Stay tuned for that. Right.
Adam, I think we have the title for this show right now.
Dogs do
right?
dog
That's
egos, right? But that's what I'm saying is like, how do you work smarter, more creative? How to make it a more interesting show? And that's the beauty of a podcast because you're a physical graphic artist. That's yours behind you right there, right? On the wall?
That one is, the giant piece is not. I wish I could claim.
I was like, I'll give you credit for that, but you're an artist too. And that's a whole other world of incredible art. And it started with the NFTs. And listen, digital art's been around for a long time. People have been creating digital world, but now we're in this place with AI where the old school, traditional modern artists are like, does that count as art? And I said, your brush has just changed. Your brush is just the mind. And if you're able to create with prompts and you're being original and you're not just, what are you feeding the machine? There's an art to that.
This is going to sound so cliche for it, but art is in everything that you do. It's more an act of the human expression, or even a computer as well. But it is that soulful expression of putting something out there.
My podcast is my canvas.
Yep. Exactly.
You know, I mean,
and you're painting with words, you're painting with content. And I love the idea of basically dropping right into conversation and then coming back afterwards. We've toyed around with that idea.
I haven't done it yet. I'm doing it on my show starting next week. I haven't done it. I have not done it yet.
You haven't done it yet. So here's what I might do. I might actually do it for our episode.
Why not?
Yeah,
who cares?
I think this is,
let me know how it turns out. Why not? Who cares?
Adam, this is all an experiment, right? And it's gotten, you're going to be published in 3 weeks or something. And then we'll probably have published, I think, maybe 8 or 10 episodes to that point. But it's an evolution, like you're saying.
Dude,
so
a couple times a year, I look back on my first few episodes, like 5 years ago. And I'm like, I'm in this conference room in a WeWork, glass walls. Like, who would idiots going in a glass walled echo chamber versus now where I have sound, I have expensive mic, Rodecaster, lights, cameras. And I'm like, wow, like I could actually physically see the progress I made on the show and invested into it and changed and morphed in like my style and the way I interview and the show graphics and everything about it. It's cool. It's like there's progress.
I love hearing it, man. Adam, I really appreciate having you on. I know for the podcast, they can catch you at www.com. So that's THEPOZCAST.com. And then for any sort of talent and recruiting, we have NHPTalentGroup.com as well. If anybody has any questions for you, is there contact information on the website or what's the best way?
Hit me up on LinkedIn.
Hey, on LinkedIn. Okay. So we have Adam Posner.
Adam J. Posner on LinkedIn. Yes. I don't always correct people because it's fun and I don't care, but because they think Posner podcast is where the podcast came from. Because so many people would call me Posner, and then somehow my nickname when I was a kid turned into Pos, right? It was just short. Don't call me Pose, it's Pos. And where it was easy when I came up with the podcast, it was just the podcast. It wasn't even, there was no even other name for the show. It was always the podcast.
I love it.
And
All
I'm
right,
not the
so
only one. There's a
biggest
few of
question.
them. There's a few other
Podcast?
podcasts out there. I'm the biggest. There's one that was around longer than me, but it's a sports. There's something else, and there's another thing I'll tell you offline. Yep.
Sounds fantastic. I think we're also not the only human code, but we are the newest right now.
Nothing's original these days.
It's tough, but at the same time, I think we're bringing something original in the episodes, and it's always good to have a conversation with you. And once again, man, thank you so much for both the inspiration and coming on the show today.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having me, and pleasure to meet your audience. And stick with Don; he's a good host.
Thank you, brother. Thank you for tuning into The Human Code, sponsored by Findustries, where we harness AI to elevate your business. By improving operational efficiency and accelerating growth, we turn opportunities into reality. Let Findustries be your guide to AI mastery, making success inevitable. Explore how at findustries.co.